China and Russia will hold a joint naval drill in the northern part of East China Sea between May the 20th and the 26th. A spokesman for the Chinese Navy said the joint C-2014 drill will focus on defense and attack, escort duties, search and rescue, and the freeing of hijacked ships, among other actions. And he reviewed the two sides will dispatch a total of 14 vessels, 2 submarines, 9 fixed-wing aircraft, as well as helicopters and special forces for the exercise. According to the spokesman, the event is a key measure for China and Russia to strengthen mutual political trust and for the two armies to deepen cooperation. He added the drill aims to boost their capabilities to jointly cope with maritime security threats and will not target any third party.
The Philippines and the United States have begun 2 weeks of joint military training dubbed Balikatan, or shoulder-to-shoulder military drills. The annual exercises have been going on for 30 years now, but as CCTV's Barnaby Low reports, this is the first since both countries signed a new defense deal that expands U.S. military presence in the Philippines.
Side by side, shoulder to shoulder, Filipino and American soldiers are recreating scenarios, swapping combat skills, and trading ideas and expertise in 2 weeks of joint military exercises dubbed Balikatan.
The Philippines and the United States hold joint military exercises several times a year. Balikatan is the largest. This year, some 5,500 Filipino and American troops are taking part, and this is the first since both countries signed a new military agreement that would increase U.S. military presence in the country.
Some of the drills involve Filipino and U.S. Marines storming a beach facing the South China Sea, aimed at helping the Philippines build its maritime surveillance capability. This at a time when tensions continue to simmer in the region due to territorial disputes.
Balikatan 2014, with its focus on maritime security, strongly supports our capabilities to address these challenges. Balikatan activities and exercises not only teach our militaries to work together, but also build Philippine capacity for defense and security, modernizing this alliance in step with the needs of the 21st century.
Tell us now, we've got an issue regarding the South China Sea again, and this obviously is the conflict between China and the Philippines about a very important part of the South China Sea. Why is there such controversy over this area?
Well, the South China Sea is actually a very strategic body of water and uninhabited islands, which is sandwiched between and claimed by countries as diverse as China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. The body of water is believed to contain abundant natural resources, and it's the home of 1/3 of the world's marine biodiversity. Furthermore, it's a very important world shipping lane. 1/3 of the world's shipping traffic passes through the sea. And for those reasons, it's a very important strategic and geopolitical area, and any conflict in the area would have not only drastic political implications, but also could bring major economic consequences for the world.
Now, to my understanding, China has now sent a third patrol vessel to this this boundary area, and it's now in its 10th day that this kind of testiness is going on, right?
That's correct. What's happened is China has actually recently retracted 2 of its vessels, and I think there's 1 more Chinese vessel remaining, which shows us that we're probably coming to the end of the standoff. But the standoff itself is significant because it does show that countries are using fishing disputes and fishing in disputed waters almost as a proxy for the larger sovereignty disputes between these countries. And the problem is that once you have a dispute like that, they get extremely difficult to de-escalate, because what you have is strong nationalist sentiment in countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and China, which makes it difficult for these countries to be seen as backing down or being weak in front of their own publics. And we've seen that, and we've also seen that there's a quasi-Coast Guard arms race going on in the region, which is contributing to actually more and more law enforcement vessels, which means that we're likely to see more of these types of skirmishes in the sea.
Now, to my understanding, most countries or international law says that the property or the boundary extends from any country 200 miles out. Now, does this include 200 miles for either China or the Philippines or anyone else?
Well, the problem right now with the South China Sea is that there are 2 issues. There's the sovereignty over the islands themselves, and after that, the UN law of the sea kicks in, where the islands to which a country has sovereignty generate an exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles. One of the problems right now in resolving the disputes is that China has put forward a 9-dashed line, and it's quite unclear to people whether that 9-dashed line, which is quite encompassing, includes territorial waters or just the islands that then create exclusive economic zones. So there's a lot of confusion over this. What's clear is that both the Philippines and China do claim Scarborough Shoal, and that's why the Chinese felt that they could go in and fish in that area.
Well, and we'll be clear about this. Scarborough Shoal is where the standoff began about 2 weeks ago, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's far closer. It's only about 200 kilometers from the coast of Philippines. In fact, it's closer than that, and it's 3 times that distance to the Chinese coast. But China's 9-dash line actually does approach some of the coastlines of countries that I mentioned earlier, the 5 to 6 different countries that are claiming portions of the South China Sea.
And the shoal is where the Philippines were complaining that these Chinese fishermen were poaching in their territory, and that's how this whole thing started. I mean, the most recent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the Philippines tried to arrest the Chinese fishermen, and then the Chinese sent in reinforcements to ensure that they weren't going to be arrested. It is worrying that it has taken 10 days to try and sort this problem out, because we can assume that the diplomats of both countries have been working on this 24 hours a day. And so it shows the dangers, really, of what are really not intentional incidents. Certainly, China and other countries are sending fishermen into disputed areas as a way of trying to show that this is part of their territory. But small incidents can easily lead to more escalated incidents or these full-blown political crises, and that's what's so worrying about the nature of skirmishes in the South China Sea.
Can you give us some idea of the types of deposits, natural resource deposits that are in this area?
Well, it's believed to contain a lot of gas and oil deposits. The problem is that the estimates are wildly divergent. The U.S. Geological Survey estimate, for example, is far lower than the estimate of the Chinese government. But it's difficult to know with any certainty simply because of the disputes. So whenever different countries try to go engage in surveys, they run into problems often by other countries that don't want to allow them to do that. For example, we saw last year an incident where a Chinese vessel cut the cable of a Vietnamese survey vessel. That was in May of 2011 that was trying to actually map the types of resources the sea might hold.
Well, I understand, too, that in Manila, the Philippine protesters were at the Chinese embassy protesting this latest incident, and they certainly want China to withdraw from that shoal. And there's 3 days of protest there. Are we going to see this kind of thing happening in the Philippines even more? I mean, obviously in China, you don't usually see that, but in the Philippines at least, will we see more protests there?
I think that it's quite likely. The Philippines, and we had the same incident last year in Vietnam following these incidents between China and the Vietnamese with regard to the cutting of the cables. You had Vietnamese on the streets in front of the Chinese embassy. And what it does is it makes it very difficult. It boxes in these governments, in fact, so that they can't step away. They can't be seen as weak. And part of the problem is that they themselves have created historical narratives whereby they claim these areas. And so the public rallies around that. And then if it comes to actually a negotiation over sovereignty, obviously everyone has to be willing to compromise. That's the nature of these negotiations. But when you have a very heated domestic political environment and nationalist public opinion to that extent, obviously it's very difficult to do that. You have to engage in very delicate messaging in order to convince the people that this is the best thing. But obviously the tensions right now in the sea are very high. And the Philippines, for example, call the sea the West Philippine Sea. The Chinese call it the South China Sea. The Vietnamese have called it the East Vietnamese Sea. So, you do see all of these different, all the different claims. And, the Spratlys, for example, are claimed by most of all of those claimants. So there's overlapping claims sometimes. It's not bilateral. It gets into 3, 4, and 5 claimants claiming the same parts of the same territories.
Well, there's some other countries here, too. You mentioned Vietnam. There's Brunei, Malaysia, and Taiwan. Have there been other skirmishes with, say, Malaysia, Taiwan, Vietnam?
There have been some, but because Malaysia and Brunei are so far south, the boats don't get there as often as they do, as we've seen with regard to Vietnam and the Philippines.
So where does this actually, where do these disputes actually go? I mean, where does one nation take their dispute to? I mean, the United Nations is one, but is there any maritime authority?
Well, I mean, what you could take advantage of are the dispute resolution mechanisms under the United Nations, because, there are two issues here. One is the sovereignty of the land features, which would then engage UNCLOS after those are decided. Arbitration would be one option. The problem is that China is not very keen to engage in arbitration because it fears that these institutions are mostly Western institutions and might be prone to issuing a decision that would force China to compromise in front of its people. China is going through an important transition right now. Frankly, China's energy is focused very much on the domestic situation, on maintaining this breakneck economic growth, on maintaining political and social stability. So I don't think that it's something that the Chinese are looking to absolutely resolve in the short term.
Well, when we take a look at this issue, and obviously with China's exploding economy, obviously it's in their interest to stake out as much territory as possible to get these natural resources, especially gas and oil, right?
Well, as a matter of fact, the Chinese are not out there engaging so much in trying to exploit these natural resources for the moment. That could change because they recognize that these are very tricky political issues. The oil companies, frankly, have a lot of other options around the world. They're obviously very present in the Middle East, in Africa and Latin America, and it does cost roughly 5 to 7 times as much to bring resources out of deep sea water than it does to do it on land. So for the moment, Chinese companies have been not so aggressive. The problem is that Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines economies, they're going to be forced to start to pull some of these resources out of the oceans more quickly because they obviously have a weaker economic situation than China.
This is where you get to understand the Chinese logic, is what the Americans did in the Caribbean in the 19th and early 20th century. So what the Americans did in the 19th and early 20th century was they gained strategic control of the Caribbean. And by doing so, they became dominant in the Western Hemisphere. And by dominating a hemisphere, they became a hegemon. And that allowed them to affect the balance of power in the Eastern Hemisphere, the other hemisphere. And that is what the history of the 20th century was all about. America tipping the balance in 2 world wars and in the Cold War. What the Chinese desire now is, the Chinese have said to me, they say, why should we be any different than you Americans in the Caribbean? You Americans were rapacious. You had gained dominance over a continent, and then you sought quite naturally, and it was your right, to gain dominance over the adjacent blue water extension of that continent. That is all what we're trying to do. Because with that blue water extension, the Asian Mediterranean, the South China Sea, China then has entry into the wider Pacific. And if you think of the Strait of Malacca as the Panama Canal, it has entry into the Indian Ocean, into the world's global energy interstate. And China becomes not a one-ocean navy, but a two-ocean navy. And with a one-ocean navy, it's just a great regional power in military terms. With a two-ocean navy, it's a great world power. The world is multipolar diplomatically, economically. But it's not multipolar militarily, because despite the disappointments of Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. Navy and Air Force still essentially dominate, much global space in East Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East. China's goal is to do likewise, and the South China Sea is as key to that ambition as the Caribbean was to the American vision. What the Chinese seek is to get the Americans not out. They're very moderate. They want the Americans' presence to be diluted in the South China Sea. They want Americans the American Navy not to have the unimpeded access to the South and East China Sea that it has now. And so it has a program of anti-access area denial, which is a horrible acronym that basically means more and more ballistic missiles, more and more cyber warfare capabilities, more and more the quietest, latest diesel-electric submarines, which are better than nuclear submarines in the close territorial, dirty waters of the South China Sea. All of which will not deny Americans access, but will make American admirals think twice and three times before they deploy in a certain area. There'll be more decisions to be made, more calculations, and that is the essence of power, to somehow constrict or seem to constrict the actions of your adversary.
Jacob, China and Russia have begun what is their largest ever joint naval exercise in the Sea of Japan. Now, this is the Chinese Navy's single biggest deployment of military force in any joint foreign exercise. The Chinese Navy is dispatching 4 guided missile destroyers, 2 guided missile frigates, a supply ship, and 3 shipborne helicopters. In total, there are 19 warships and more than 10 aircraft and helicopters that are taking part in these maneuvers. China's National Defense Ministry saying these drills are not targeted at any third party or third country, and the aim is simply to deepen cooperation between the militaries of Russia and China. The two navies will practice recapturing ships. There will also be a number of air defense, anti-submarine and anti-ship exercises. Russia and China have regularly held joint naval drills since 2005.
The Chinese Army Battle Group says it's ready for the China-Russia joint military exercise with final preparations underway. Zheng Suwei has the story.
The Chinese Army Battle Group consists of an armed force affiliated to a mechanized army contingent of Shenyang Military Area Command. The main equipment includes tanks, howitzers, anti-aircraft missiles and gunship helicopters. The battle group is divided into 3 combat contingents, 1 artillery contingent, 1 commando unit, 1 air defense contingent, 1 army aviation contingent, and logistics support. During a field maneuver, these contingents will jointly achieve the anti-terrorism task.
We have worked out contingency plans for complex weather conditions, also conducting LALO, or low-altitude opening parachuting, helicopter attacks, and other task-oriented exercise.
The Russian Army Group consists of a large number of personnel and equipment. To deal with this, the Chinese Battle Group has adopted measures to strengthen command coordination and ground logistics between 2 armies. The Russian and Chinese battle groups will hold rehearsals and joint training before they carry out field maneuvers.
The USS George Washington, a nuclear-powered supercarrier, took part in a joint military naval drill with Japan on Thursday in waters off southern Japan, just days after it participated in humanitarian relief operations in the Philippines. While the US Navy would not confirm the exact coordinates, they were able to say the event took place at one point at least, some 186 miles southeast of Japan's southernmost of the islands of Okinawa. This is the general vicinity, though not within the new airspace defense zone which China newly established last week. China's airspace defense zone claims have raised the stakes in a territorial standoff between Beijing and Tokyo over the area, which includes the tiny uninhabited islands known as the Senkaku in Japan. Japan claims they are part of the Okinawa Islands. The zone includes the skies over the long-disputed islands, and China said planes flying in the area would have to notify Chinese authorities. The United States defied China's demand that airplanes flying near the islands identify themselves to Chinese authorities, flying 2 unarmed B-52 bombers over the islands on Tuesday without informing Beijing. Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery told reporters on board the USS George Washington that the exercises were planned before China's announcement of the zone.
On their promise. My next guest says the latest incident in which a Chinese warship tried to force a U.S. guided missile cruiser to stop in international waters was likely staged by the Chinese. He believes the United States' response was in fact appropriate. Joining us now, General Jack Keane, retired 4-star Army general, former Army Vice Chief of Staff, Fox News military analyst. General, thank you for joining us here tonight. And the way this ship had to maneuver, we don't have the specifics, but it's clear that the Chinese seem to be intent on interdicting the ship and literally bringing it to a stop.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the Chinese are out there in the South China Sea, conducted naval maneuvers. You know, they've acquired some new ships. They're out there with their aircraft carrier that they've got from Russia. And the fact of the matter is we normally would surveil something like that as they would do on our naval operations. And I'm suspecting strongly that's what our ship was doing in international waters. We have the right to observe them. They clearly, this is all about power and control, Lou. They really want to regain control and influence in the Western Pacific, something we have dominated for years. And they're going to find many ways to push back. The air defense zone that we've discussed in previous episodes is an indicator of that. This is another one. And these things are going to continue to occur more frequently, and I do believe the scale will also increase.
The scale, by my understanding of what you're saying, would suggest scale means even greater jeopardy, because that introduces a number of variables that can't be controlled. Is that what you're implying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's islands out in the East China Sea, for example, and in the South China Sea as well, that the Chinese believe they are the appropriate owners of, and that is certainly contested by others who are living there and are owned by other countries. I think one of the things they'll do in terms of dramatically increasing scale is they'll just plop down some troops on one of those islands and say this is ours, and that'll obviously present a challenge to our allies and also a challenge to us. They're going to look for these opportunities to force us to push back in the Western Pacific. And that's what the air defense zone was about, so we would not conduct surveillance operations on what they're doing. They want us too far out to be able to do that. We do that routinely, almost on a daily basis. And now they want to push our shipping back, so our naval ships, so we cannot observe what is taking place. We have a right to be there, Lou, and every indication I have from our government, from the Pentagon, is that we're going to stick to our rights and continue to have the influence that our allies expect us to have.
That's got to be reassuring to our allies as well as those who are interested, obviously, in this country preserving its prominence in the world.
On in the South China Sea at the moment, the exercises that China's carrying out with its first aircraft carrier off Hainan in the South China Sea, those are being very, very closely watched. We've already seen one near miss with a US warship. There could be more. Various analysts are warning about being very, very wary of future close calls. Then we've got the new air defense zone that China's created in the East China Sea. That's causing great worries for the US and Japan. There could be more surveillance flights, more jet fighters being scrambled to check out planes that have not identified themselves to China. And China hasn't ruled out putting that in the South China Sea either. If China creates one of those air defense zones in the South China Sea, it's going to further rise tensions. Then as the year progresses, we're expecting to see more oil exploration activity, potentially in disputed waters off Vietnam. China's objected to this in the past. It's physically interfered with ships during exploration, cutting cables and so on. It's fair to say that the tensions seem to be rising with each passing year and are of greater concern, not just around the region and in Washington, but also increasingly in Europe because of trade flows. The South China Sea is absolutely vital to world trade. Not only does Japan, South Korea, China get the bulk of their oil through the South China Sea, but trade to the rest of the world flows through there as well. So it's a pretty important waterway.
戦などおよびこに射撃をしたのです。速やかに陣地を変換して左山の右下に
In Beijing, the Chinese government called on the United States to stay out of its territorial disputes with nations around the South China Sea. Speaking to reporters, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said her country's opposition to a UN arbitration case launched by the Philippines to challenge China's claims had not changed, a position that she said was supported by international law.
China and ASEAN countries have enough wisdom to deal with relevant issues appropriately and safeguard peace and stability in the South China Sea. Countries outside the region should fully respect the consensus and efforts made by countries within the region and support their efforts to resolve disputes peacefully through negotiation. The situation in the sea now is stable, and if relevant countries want to maintain this stability, they should make less trouble.
The Foreign Ministry's comments came after U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry told Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang and other leaders attending this year's East Asia Summit that America supported the Philippines arbitration bid. The South China Sea is rich in fish and oil and gas resources and straddles some of the world's most important shipping lanes. In addition to the Philippines, China's claim to nearly the entire body of water also brings it into dispute with Vietnam, Malaysia and Brunei. In recent months, however, it's China's disagreement with America's ally, the Philippines, that has come sharply to the fore. Last month, the Philippines claimed China was illegally building structures on Scarborough Shoal, a reef disputed by the two countries that China seized control of last year. Accusing China of a massive military buildup, the Philippines is now in talks for an increased American military presence on its soil. Experts say a new base planned for the eastern island of Palawan, which is closer to disputed islands than it is to the bulk of the Philippines, will likely house US Marines. On Wednesday, a top Chinese foreign policy advisor accused the Philippines of deliberate provocation.
As China rises is not only coming into disagreement with America, some countries like Japan and the Philippines are deliberately adopting policies to antagonize China. For them, this is an opportunity. They don't want to try to resolve disputes because they will get a bigger payoff from antagonism.
This week, the US and Philippines have been carrying out joint live-fire exercises in the province of Zambales, which is about 200 kilometers across the sea from Scarborough Shoal. Stephen Rebay, Press TV, Beijing.
President Obama's comments may sound sweet to the ears of the Japanese and especially Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, but to the ears of the Chinese public, the president's comments are a kind of violation of China's interests related to the Diaoyu Islands. And the Japan-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty is left over from the Cold War era. It should not cover China's territory of Diaoyu Islands. And the president's comments to include Diaoyu Islands into the treaty between the U.S. and Japan amounts to kind of a coercion or threat of force over China's territorial sovereignty over the Diaoyu Islands. So these comments are very counterproductive.
Do you think that this visit to Japan and the comments will affect China-U.S. relations at all?
Certainly, the U.S. is building a new mode of major power relationship with China, and also as a major ally of Japan, the U.S. should tell Japan to come to dialogue with China, not to provoke on the history issue over the Diaoyu Islands. And the United States should not overplay its hedging strategy towards China. Otherwise, it will be very much counterproductive, and China will take countermeasures against that. It will increase actually mutual distrust between China and the U.S.
The 10-year pact the two countries reached
would give U.S. forces temporary access to selected military camps and allow them to position fighter jets and ships. It would also increase coordination between U.S. and Filipino forces, boost the Philippine military's capabilities to monitor and secure the country's territory, and respond more rapidly to natural disasters and other emergencies. Before stopping in the Philippines, Obama was in Japan, South Korea, and Malaysia.
And let me reiterate that our treaty commitment to Japan's security is absolute, and Article 5 covers all territories under Japan's administration, including the Senkaku Islands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Arigato, Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. President, in regards to the Senkaku Islands,
Large countries, small countries, all have to abide by what is considered just and fair, and that we are resolving disputes in peaceful fashion. And this is a message that I've delivered directly to the Chinese, and it's one that I think is entirely consistent with China being successful. I think the alternative is a situation in which large countries like the United States or China or Russia or other countries feel as if whenever they think it's expedient, they can take actions that disadvantage smaller countries.
China, however, rejected Mr. Obama's remark that the security treaty between the U.S. and Japan covers a chain of islets disputed by Beijing and Tokyo. The so-called U.S.-Japan Security Treaty is a product of the Cold War era, and it cannot be aimed at a third party and ought not to harm China's territorial sovereignty. No matter what anyone says or does, it cannot change the basic reality that the Diaoyu Islands are China's inherent territory and cannot shake the resolve and determination of the Chinese government and people to protect our sovereignty and maritime rights.
We're paying close attention to the military moves by the Japanese side. At the same time, Chinese military forces will continue to patrol relevant areas. Again, I want to emphasize that the Diaoyu Islands are Chinese territory. Chinese armed forces are capable of defending the islands. And there's no need to bother other countries or for other nations to be concerned about security.
So far, the White House has remained silent on China's reaction.
Japan rattles its sabre, or rather its samurai sword, putting on a show of force at an annual military display in Funabashi. The theme was quite pointedly island defence for the second year in a row, as tensions continue with the Chinese over a disputed group of islets in the East China Sea. Earlier, Beijing sending 3 of its ships into what Japan considers its territorial waters, the first such move this year, which is why Japan feels it needs to show its military muscle. Elite paratroopers from the 1st Airborne Brigade among 1,600 members of the country's self-defence force showing off their moves, under the watchful eye of Defence Minister Itsunori Onodera.
We can never overlook China's repeated entries into our territorial waters. In addition to diplomatic efforts, we will cooperate with the Coast Guard to securely defend our territory and waters around the Senkaku Islands.
Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel leaves for Japan today after wrapping up a security forum with Asia-Pacific defense ministers yesterday in Hawaii. The secretary told reporters the meeting was a milestone in America's growing partnership with Asia-Pacific nations. He said one of the issues discussed was the increased tension in the South China Sea.
I told the ministers that the United States is increasingly concerned about the instability arising from the territorial disputes in the South China Sea. The rights of all nations must be respected. It's important that all claimants avoid the use or threat of force or intimidation or coercion.
The secretary urged any disputed claims to be settled using international law.
Obama said the U.S. security treaty with Japan does apply to the disputed Diaoyu Islands, and Japanese media has also said that Abe's government might compromise on that Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations with the U.S. in exchange for backing on the Diaoyu Islands.
What I need to point out is that the so-called U.S.-Japan alliance is a bilateral arrangement from the Cold War and should not harm China's territorial sovereignty and reasonable rights. We resolutely oppose the Diaoyu Islands being part of the Japanese Security Treaty. The United States should respect the facts and take a responsible attitude to abide by its promise not to take sides on issues of territorial disputes, speak carefully and act cautiously, and earnestly play a constructive role in maintaining regional peace as well as stability.
As President Barack Obama continues his tour of Japan, the U.S. leader has reaffirmed his support for Tokyo in its row over islands with China. Mr. Obama, who is on a four-nation Asia tour, warned against escalation in the dispute and said that he wanted to see the row resolved peacefully. But after talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the U.S. president confirmed that the islands fall under a security treaty that commits the U.S. to act if Japan is attacked. The two leaders also discussed a major trade deal as well as North Korea.
For China's take on the U.S.-Philippines joint military exercises, I spoke earlier with Su Xiao from the China Institute of International Studies. Su Xiaowei, can you tell us why China opposes these military exercises between the United States and Philippines?
Well, I have to say that we did not say that we oppose this kind of military drills between the two sides. Actually, China looks at this kind of drill in a balanced way. We understand that this is an annual drill between the two countries, and we believe that it is kind of signal from the United States to show its military perspective of its very balanced strategy. But what China is concerned is about the current situation. We all know that in recent days there is escalating tension in the South China Sea. So the U.S. and Philippines held a military drill in this time is not helpful for the current situation. China is worrying about worsening situation in the related waters and more provocations from related countries. That is what China is talking about, that this military drill should play a constructive role or should avoid bad or negative influence on the situation.
The United States says these military drills were actually planned way before the tensions in South China Sea ever came about.
You're right. Well, as I said, this is an annual drill, and China understands that this drill has been scheduled before the current incidents. But what we are looking for is that the two countries should show some positive signals to the outside world that they are not aiming at China, and they want regional stability, and they want the tension to be resolved in a peaceful way.
In a sign that tensions in the South China Sea are continuing to hit land, anti-China demonstrators near Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, people could be seen rushing through barricades and gates. They were protesting an oil rig recently placed by a Chinese state-run company in a disputed area of the sea claimed by Vietnam. And on water, things are just as volatile. On Monday, a water cannon fight erupted between Vietnamese and Chinese vessels near the oil rig. Vietnam is in a tough spot. Like Japan and the Philippines, it's embroiled in territorial disputes with Beijing. But unlike those two nations, Vietnam doesn't have the staunch backing of the U.S. to use as leverage in its spat with China, and is heavily dependent on Chinese imports.
The Vietnamese Coast Guard released this footage on Wednesday of what it says is a Chinese ship ramming a Vietnamese vessel in the South China Sea. Tensions are escalating in the region over a Chinese oil rig situated in the contested waters. The drilling platform is run by the state-owned China National Offshore Oil Corp. Vietnam says the rig is 130 miles from its shore and thus, quote, totally within its exclusive economic zone. China claims that the rig is within its own territorial waters. A standoff over the rig broke into open confrontation between dozens of Chinese military and civilian ships and the Vietnamese Coast Guard. At a press conference Wednesday, the vice commander of the Vietnamese Coast Guard said that 80 Chinese vessels were in the area, including 7 military ships. He said that Vietnamese vessels had been repeatedly rammed roughly 10 miles from the oil rig. Officials also said China used water cannons in the confrontations. China's foreign ministry said it had asked Vietnam to stop interfering in what it described as a Chinese business's normal operations.
Tension in the South China Sea. Hanoi and Beijing are in a standoff over a Chinese oil rig in these disputed waters. The captain of a Vietnamese Coast Guard ship says they will concede nothing.
We're determined to fulfill our duty, which is to protect the sovereignty of Vietnam's special economic zones and territories, and prevent the violation of an outside force, especially Chinese forces.
The tension comes as General Martin Dempsey meets with his Chinese counterpart in Washington.
Issues afloat quickly become issues ashore, as we've seen today in Vietnam.
China claims almost the entire South China Sea, an area rich in energy deposits.
前面去吧。 And still in China, the Defense Ministry reiterated that its hypersonic missile test was aimed at scientific research and not targeted at any country. In a faxed response to the press, the ministry said that the test was conducted over Chinese territory. Earlier, a U.S. website reported that the hypersonic missile was detected last week flying at 10 times the speed of sound, that is about 12,000 kilometers an hour. A spokesperson for the U.S. Defense Department told the newspaper that it was aware of this test. The website Free Beacon said the test made China the second country after the United States to have successfully tested a hypersonic delivery vehicle which is able to carry nuclear warheads at a speed above Mach 10.
的是，此前军力报告更关注中国常规军力。在2012年美国国防部发布的中国军力报告中，则提及了中国网络信息作战能力。那么关注焦点的转变又透露何种信号武器作为一种新概念武器，被称为是21世纪的原子弹，而这并非耸人听闻。电子脉冲武器能通过电磁辐射来压制和摧毁对手电子信息、指挥控制和军用网络等系统。而对于中国的电子脉冲武器，外界一直传闻不断。亚太防务打这些导弹可迅速摧毁敌方的防。而就在12月3号，美国还首次利用无人机进行了电磁脉冲武器测试。在这一次试验中，电磁脉冲炸弹成功对7个目标放出了电磁脉冲。
在用电磁脉冲武器攻击对手方面呢，又迈出了关键性一步。美国呢，他们一贯是在他自己有了新的大威力攻击性武器后呢，喜欢反过头来虚构对方拥有了某某进攻性武器。对我美国造成
是美国3号刚试射了自己的电磁脉冲武器，2天之后就提出防范中国的电磁脉冲武器发展，这是巧合还是另有玄？
现有东风31和东风31A 机动洲际弹道导弹之外，灯塔称此次东风41洲际导弹从位于中国中西部的某导弹及航天测试中心向中国西部目标区发射。报道称，这是中国第2次试射这款新型公路机动远程洲际导弹。其首次试射于2012年7月进行。监视2012年的战略武器系统报告称，采用公路机动方式的东风41用于替代容易被定位的部署在发射井中的东风5和为东风41在性能上可能具备怎样的特点，能让美国对这款被称为东风41的洲际导弹感到如鲠在喉。几乎在与外界热炒中国东风41的同时，美国成功试射民兵3洲际导弹。美国民兵3与俄罗斯镇国重器白杨 M 的身上又体现了先进洲际导弹怎样的共同特点？面对外界连续猜测和炒作中国试射所谓东风41，
只有1万公里左右，实际上1万多一点。在能够达到1万4，一看就是从北京到越过这个太平洋，再到美国华盛顿，实际上这个距离正好是14000公里，所以他就感到如果有这么一个这么大的这么射程呢，能够对美国华盛顿东边嘛，所以从这个太平洋，从北京这条开始直线量的话，跨越这个太平洋正好到华盛顿，正好14000公里，所以这是美国或者西方媒体最关注的一个地方，就是他非常担心的这么一个问题。
有32部可重新装填的东风41洲际导弹发射装置，其携带的核弹头就足以瞄准每一个人口超过5万的美国城镇。他宣称，如果中国最终制定了这种针对美国城市打击社会财富的战略，而我们不建设用来抗击的导弹防御系统，就意味着在亚洲增强核威慑力量的终结。据悉，对洲际弹道导弹来说，射程的重要性首当其冲。洲际弹道导弹通常只射程大于8000公里的远程弹道式导弹，它是战略核力量的重要组成部分，主要用于攻击敌国领土上的重要军事、政治和经济目标。据美国媒体报道，当地时间2013年12月17日，美国空军全球打击司令部从范登堡空军基地成功发射一枚民兵3型洲际弹道导弹。这次试射检验了该型号导弹的命中精确度和可靠性，为美军作战提供了宝贵数据，以确保美国核武器力量的有效性和威慑力。用分导式多弹头，命中精度高。现在仍有约700枚在美军导弹部队服役，其射程据报道达到12500公里。美国空军称，这次试验达到了预定目标，展示了美国战略威慑的有效性和灵活性，同时称这是美国空军今年计划的最后一次弹道导弹试验。
打击战争开始，中国东风211中程反舰弹道导弹携带的电磁脉冲武器能摧毁美国航母战斗群上的所有电子设备，使美国航母的整个作战系统陷入瘫痪。 电磁脉冲武器诞生于核爆蘑菇云中。1962年，美军的一次核爆试验产生的高能电磁脉冲，让距离核爆点上千公里之外的美军电子通信监视指挥系统全部失灵，这也激发了美军研制该武器的灵感。